Okay. Hey everyone, my name is Aman Khan, and I'm a senior product manager at Arize AI. I'm joined today by Markus Mar-Liu, a senior product manager at Disney Streaming. Markus focuses on personalization efforts across Disney Streaming, which he'll go into more detail on as we discuss how to close the gap between AI teams and executives, and how to approach collaboration across those teams to ensure success of ML initiatives. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat pod, and we'll answer those after the talk in the Arize Slack community. As a bit of an aside, Markus and I also both previously worked together at Cruise, where we built model evaluation strategies and platforms for self-driving cars. Markus, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Aman. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. With that, let's jump into your background a little bit. So you've spent some time in databases and systems engineering before working on machine learning platform development for self-driving cars, and then moving on to Disney. That's a really impressive resume. What lessons from those roles inform your current perspective?
That's a great question. I think that starting from systems engineering, what it really showed me was how to approach products from a holistic sense. In that time, we ran operations where we had to consider real-time trade-offs across different subsystems, like your attitude control unit, propulsion, transmitters, and what it meant in terms of things like connectivity, weight, heat, and orientation for a lot of the space systems that I was working on. And we take the similar sort of approach when I think about Disney Plus subscribers and Disney streaming subscribers overall. And we want to look at the engagement impact that we can have and optimize that experience at different levels, from a specific content title to across different sessions that the user is spinning up. At Cruise, as we both were there, I think one thing that really stood out was around the infrastructure, particularly machine learning infrastructure, and how they can really scale our business. Platforms like this are very high leverage, and we're able to really streamline our ML development when we are all marching in that same sort of direction. A key insight that I found as I was working more and more on ML platforms at Cruise was this notion around type 1 and type 2 decision. And the type 1 decisions here are things that are hard to reverse, things that are more permanent and require a little bit more thought before we act on it. Type 2 is more thinking about decisions that can be reversed. And as a result, perhaps we need to spend a little bit less rigor of thought towards it. And we really want to focus on those type 1 decisions to make sure we get the assumptions on our infrastructure correct, understand how this might scale up with our increased usage, whether it be from users or across our internal stakeholders, and then really how we can leverage that in the future.
That's awesome. It sounds like you've been thinking about scale and sort of how your product decisions impact many different users and many different models all at once. And I think that's a great segue into learning a little bit more about your experience at Disney Streaming. Can you talk to us about what you do at Disney and how that applies to the scale you just referenced?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I'm the senior product manager for our core recommendations that powers our personalization and content discovery for Disney Plus, Hulu, Star Plus, and ESPN Plus. It's been an incredibly interesting challenge since each product is at a different stage of their life cycle. On one hand, you have Star Plus, which we recently launched in Latin America, to Disney Plus, which has experienced massive growth in its first couple of years, to Hulu that is optimizing and continuing to adapt its personalization approach even a decade later. And so would we personalize really across the full experience, the homepage and autoplay? So when you open the app, we can best tailor that experience to you, whether you're not sure what you want to watch and looking to discover that kind of hidden show or movie that you didn't realize you would really like, or if you're looking for a specific title to continue watching or rewatch. And on the note of scale, ideally we would have a person that has a deep knowledge of you and could perfectly recommend content for your mood and interests. However, this obviously doesn't scale as we grow from 196 million subscribers across the globe, each with different languages and cultural preferences. And so really a big part of what I'm thinking about is how we can further leverage our platform and services in concert with our recommendation model research.
That's amazing. That sounds like an incredibly far-reaching surface and a ton of scale across the world as well. What sort of technical capabilities do you need to have in a platform like this to really leverage technology like this at scale?
Yeah, I would say that our modeling development generally follows 6 stages, starting from analysis to operationalizing our models. And that full loop connects our ML platform with multiple different services while also allowing us to iterate within a given stage. And so in particular, I would say we see a lot of benefits from our data loop and experimentation and operationalizing stages as well. So on the data loop side, we have this massive content catalog. It's combined with context and why different subscriber cohorts engage with it. And we really look to combine that with our feature engineering and data pre-processing in order to make this input accessible to our models. And there's a heavy emphasis that we have towards experimentation. A/B experimenting is critical to make sure data-informed decisions about which models perform better, the scenarios where we can improve, and feeding that into that next iteration. We had a recent blog post out actually from our Experiment X team that has built a fantastic experimentation platform that offers us that flexibility to experiment with any part of the app experience. The experiment design is also super important. It allows us to differentiate different segments that we want to measure when and where our models are most effective. And so it's been really exciting to see like this experimentation platform grow and connect that to our model development so that we can really take advantage of it and be really experiment first in how we approach it. The last one I'd say is around operationalizing our models. And we've explored different levels of latency for model serving to make sure that we can connect subscribers to that fresh and relevant content in like a very timely way. I mean, users today have so many different options for their content that they can view, so many different subscriptions that they have. And as a result, that timeliness and relevancy is of utmost importance.
Yeah, amazing. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the whole sort of model generation and evaluation process is sort of an iterative loop. It's sort of a feedback loop in many ways that has all of these sort of complex surfaces around experimentation and evaluation. So how does monitoring and troubleshooting model performance look like in your flow? Like what typically goes wrong and how do you try and get into the weeds to really solve problems when you've monitored and determined that your performance might not be what you expected it to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We measure like our model performance in the offline environment and the online environment, right? And so on the offline side, we've explored tracking and measuring model explainability across the spectrum, where we might look at specific samples, scenarios, and then overall, let's say, feature importance to understand why our models make certain decisions in certain scenarios, as well as what goes into, what is influencing that model as well. And so a lot of this manifests in the evaluation loop that we have, where we can tune our models based on these different scenarios and data sets, the different content and subscriber preferences. On the online side, this is where we look a little bit more towards like monitoring dashboards and like how we are able to connect the two between offline and online and be able to draw like a lot of those parallels to make sure that what we are seeing on the offline actually can translate to online. And so as an overall kind of trend, as our models are developed offline and deployed online, it's important that we have that consistent model metrics between the environments that are correlated again to our engagement goals.
Got it. So this almost sounds like, almost like a process decision that you have to make to kind of what this flow looks like. There are technology components as well. You mentioned monitoring dashboards, and then also just a deeper understanding of the metrics that you're evaluating as well. I'm kind of curious how this all comes together in periods of change. So let's take like, for example, COVID-19, right? Disney Plus launched shortly before the onset of COVID, which obviously brought like large swings in consumer behavior. So how did you approach monitoring for drift and ensuring that you can separate outliers from permanent trends when you were just kind of getting started with this approach?
Yeah, so I think that I will say that both both are important, that can give you a signal towards like different changes in user behavior, in your model behavior and the overall product. And so it's really important for us when we want to identify when and why outliers occur. And then we also want to prevent optimizing for transient trends versus like those long-term shifts in behavior that we want to start to account for. And so I kind of view this across like three different areas. So like one of those is around experimentation and analytics. Another one's around our modeling itself. And the last one I would say is around our best practices. And so looking at like our experimentation and analytics, we really think of this as having year over year, month over month comparisons. And we combine that with the experiments that we run, some shorter, some longer, and have a holdout group that we can measure and compare against the other group that actually has gotten those model changes in that we think will increase the engagement. On the modeling side, we try to build in this behavior to our models themselves. We try to build in this adaptive model behavior for known or potential drivers of like data drift, for example, things like seasonality, where we can start to understand and mitigate where we might expect some of those spikes or shifts in behavior to manifest. In general, too, we think about like how can we increase the number of features and the number of signals that our model can get. And we tend to employ things like content embeddings for higher usage of these features. And kind of going on the last one towards like best practices, I spoke about this a little bit before, but thinking about like how offline model metrics in the online production environment as a vehicle to measure changes in those model performances. And then being able to constantly retrain and experiment with different model architectures or different ways of serving the model in order to compare those against each other.
Yeah, I mean, it truly sounds like this is, a lot of this process is built around robustness to be able to handle changes like this when they occur, and just being deliberate, almost like you said, like it's as if a human is on the other side, making sure that the decisions being made are as personalized as possible. I'd like to change gears here a little bit, as we've kind of been talking about model performance and environment drift and how things can change and how you handle change, into something a little bit more core to Disney's DNA. And, it's very well known that Disney's leadership in diversity and inclusion is world renowned. So how do you approach ensuring AI fairness and kind of trying to eliminate algorithmic bias in your models? Would you say explainability is important in your workflow, or how do you tackle that today?
Yeah, I think that we look at it. We look at it from a few different angles, right? There isn't necessarily like this one size fits all, and so we try to approach it from different lenses. And so looking at the analysis aspect, like data analysis, to understand different segments of our population, different types of content that we offer. There's also the content that itself, and then the modeling that we can use that takes in those as inputs. And so from like data analysis, from the top, we evaluate our different segments that we can use in training and evaluation. We might optimize for specific user segments that balances users who may have joined recently to users who have engaged with us for 12 plus months. As you can imagine, like these sort of user groups might have different preferences in what we would want to recommend for them. And so what you can kind of see is that it's important for us to deeply understand how different dimensions like tenure or demographics or location, or even like current events that are happening around us can impact our models. And we do put a strong emphasis on like how we can tease out the different aspects regarding each of those dimensions. And then on the content side, Disney as a whole is vertically integrated. We have in-house content experts that understand at almost a frame level how to merchandise our content and potential ways that we can personalize it across our audience. We combine that with things like regional experts and the partner teams that have actually boots on the ground in certain countries, Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, that we can really lean on to tease out some of the more cultural nuances that might be a little bit harder to identify through explicit data. And this kind of all coalesces in like when we think about modeling, we build a personalized experience that combines editorially curated content and these model recommendations to try and balance like the best of both worlds and give like a user in any of these respective countries the content that we believe and we know that they would want to watch next.
That's amazing. So it's almost like even when it comes to fairness and bias in your models, it's not really just at the model level by itself. It's sort of these multiple tiers of systems of checks and balances that allow that, sort of making sure that the content that you're delivering to users is personalized and fair and unbiased in many ways, according to the region that they might be in, according to their background demographic. And of course, there's the algorithmic aspect to that as well, but all of these factors kind of combine for that. And that's sort of interesting because, we've kind of seen in a few different instances in the news, AI can kind of go off the rails at times, and models might be called out for being unfair or biased in some ways. And you have this interesting position where you're at basically a startup in a large enterprise in some ways. So is it fair to say that the mantra is actually move fast, but don't break things? And what does that actually look like at ensuring sort of an ML service level performance monitoring and latency capability?
Yeah, I would say that we don't really think of it as breaking things, but there's certainly like areas around the company where we can leverage like pre-existing infrastructure or pre-existing knowledge that can actually help free us towards those research opportunities or like further understanding our content or our user when we are making these recommendations. And so just like our models, we are learning as our subscribers are evolving. As our subscribers evolve, our modeling needs have evolved. And as we add more and more users across Disney Plus, Hulu, Star Plus, and ESPN Plus, our platform also has evolved with it. And so what we're finding is that we take a very iterative approach, not only to our development, but also to our experiments and our modeling, in so far as we can experiment into what is most meaningful to our subscribers and then overall Disney streaming. And so there's also an aspect I would say around like how we think about the process leading up into a launch. And you know, Disney is a large company, right? And there is a lot of great world-class content marketing and our ability to really have strong releases. And we want to leverage that in our ML loop as well. And so this really is a joint effort across many different teams, like our analytics teams, our ML platform teams, our research, and our content teams, to make sure that we can have sufficient dry runs and QA releases and properly dog food these product features in order for us to have a lot of confidence that it can achieve the outcome that we anticipate.
Got it. So it almost sounds like at Disney, when it comes to machine learning, you know, machine learning is a core part of the strategy that touches so many other different parts that's where the collaboration happens around these sort of new releases for new content, new regions, and new models and features potentially even. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Markus. I wish you and your team all the best as you kind of continue to scale machine learning at your company. Perhaps we'll be talking more in the future. And reminder of those of you that, for those of you that asked any questions, we'll be following up on those in the Slack community, and Markus will be able to kind of tackle those questions as they come up. So thanks again for your time, Markus. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Aman.